Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Crystalcast. My name is Ross and I'm an immigration lawyer based in Sydney. This week we have a number of topics that we're going to be discussing, particularly providing unlawful immigration advice. What does that mean for you as a client, and also what does it mean for you as a provider? I will also be talking about the recent review which has occurred in relation to the health requirements for visa applications. Now, specifically talking about health waivers. We'll also look into the review of the permanent residency uptake for 2024-25, and we will finish off with having a conversation with Reese Brace, who will discuss cybersecurity, which is such an important topic in this day and age, given that all of us heavily rely on digital devices. Just like this podcast is being done on a digital device, therefore cybersecurity is paramount. It's one of those things that you want to ensure that you are prepared for if and when it happens. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode. Now, to start off the podcast, what I wanted to talk about is provision of unlawful immigration assistance. Now, you might be wondering, or maybe you're not wondering and you're aware of the situation, but there are specific circumstances around how and when immigration advice can be provided. Now, given that immigration advice carries such heavy responsibility and also liability, it is important that immigration advice is provided by someone who is trained to do so. So what I wanted to discuss, first and foremost, what is immigration advice? And secondly, who can provide immigration advice? So let's start off with the first topic. What is immigration advice? Now, that's quite a broad definition in its sense. Essentially, an immigration advice is assistance with a visa application or a matter, whether that advice is provided in writing or whether that advice is provided orally. So for example, if someone provides you advice in regards to choosing a particular course to study, or whether they provide you advice in relation to your eligibility for a partner visa, that is considered within the scope and a definition of immigration advice and assistance. So whether or not that advice was put into writing makes no difference. And there are rules around who can help with immigration assistance. It's important to ensure that the person who's helping you is either a registered migration agent or a legal practitioner. Now, whether you choose to use a registered migration agent or a legal practitioner is entirely comes down to your choice, but it's important to check that a registered migration agent is registered and a legal practitioner is in fact a legal practitioner. Now, both can be verified on various platforms. If you choose to use a registered migration agent, you can visit mara.gov.au, and you will be able to find the name of the person who claims to be a migration agent and verify their details. If you're going to be using a legal practitioner, you can visit the State Law Society website, where you'll be able to find the name of the person who is a registered legal practitioner. So that's the first bit. Now, the second bit in relation to those who can't provide immigration advice are those who are not registered migration agents or legal practitioners. Now, in certain circumstances, individuals such as close family members can help you with your visa application, and these are called exempt people. So, for example, let's say if I was not a migration agent or a legal practitioner and I wanted to assist my parent or my brother or my sister in their visa application, I would be able to do so. So exempt persons, these are individuals who are not registered migration agents or a legal practitioner. They may still help you with the application if they fit into one of the following categories. They are your nominator or your sponsor, so whether that's work visa or a partner visa. They're a close family member. They are a member of a diplomatic mission. They're a member of a consul post, or they are preparing a submission to the Minister for Home Affairs. A person who is not a registered migration agent or a legal practitioner must not charge you a fee for their help. So there are rules around that particular requirement as well. Now, Why is it important to pick someone who's able to assist you with immigration matter? Now, first and foremost, irrespective of the costs that you may incur for immigration matter, it comes down to the ramifications. Now, let's say if you received advice in regards to applying for a particular visa and you do not satisfy the time of application criteria, therefore your visa is refused. Now, the consequences of having your visa refused could potentially result in having you being barred from lodging another visa application for up to 3 years. Now, it may not be the circumstances with all visas, but that is just a common example of what could happen. Second consequence, monetary. Now, in most circumstances, there are limited provisions where one could get a refund for their visa application. So if you were to lodge or have a visa application lodged on your behalf and that visa application does not meet the legal criteria, you would not be eligible for a refund. And third, and I think the most important point here, is the stress of it. Now, immigration can be a stressful experience. It can be quite exhausting experience as well. But what will make it more stressful is knowing that the application that you have lodged does not meet the criteria and cannot be granted. And also understanding that in addition to that, there are consequences of this occurring. So therefore, it is not a matter of choice of choosing whether you use or not use a migration professional, whether that's a legal practitioner or whether that's a registered migration agent. It's about understanding the ramifications. And Australia has some of the toughest migration regulations in the world and probably some of the most complicated migration regulations. And that's the reason why we release this podcast on a weekly basis, because there is just a ton of information that one can convey when it comes to the changing rules and regulations. And it is important to ensure that the public understands the difference between a lawful immigration provider, that being a migration agent and a legal practitioner, and someone who is an unlawful immigration provider. As I said, it is illegal to provide immigration assistance if you are not registered with the Law Society or the Office of OMARA. Now, if you have fallen to be a victim of a unregistered advice or unsolicited advice, make sure you contact us. Inquiries@crystalmigration.net. That's inquiries@crystalmigration.net. Now let's discuss Australia's health requirements. In most circumstances, visa applicants are required to meet the health requirement, whether it is for a temporary visa or a permanent visa. Now, in most circumstances, that doesn't prove to be an issue if there are no health conditions or underlying health conditions. However, it does prove to be somewhat of a burden if an applicant has an ongoing health condition that requires an ongoing care, so a chronic condition. Now, the aim of the migration health requirement is to protect the Australian community from public health and safety risks, and also contain public expenditure on health care and community services. So I just want to talk about this second point here, contain public expenditure on health care and community services. What this refers to is that certain chronic conditions, so for example, whether it be hepatitis or HIV or any other condition which lasts for longer than 6 months, it can potentially incur an ongoing cost. Now, the tricky part in health waivers and the health requirement is that the health requirement is measured against what's called a hypothetical person. So for example, if someone has HIV, the health costing comes back in relation to what a hypothetical person with this particular condition would ordinarily require. Now, the reason for this is to ensure that the system remains fair. So, for example, if a person currently holds a health insurance which covers the costs of their treatment and they become a permanent resident, they are eligible for Medicare, so therefore they no longer need to maintain their health insurance. And also, unfortunately, as with all health conditions, the prognosis and diagnosis can and does change from time to time. Now, the current significant cost threshold cutoff sits at 51,000 Australian dollars. So, what this means is that if the condition that the applicant suffers from exceeds $51,000 over the lifetime of the visa, or in permanent visa cases, 5 years, then the applicant will not pass the health check or the health requirement. So there is at the moment what's called a discussion or paper of review Australia's significant cost threshold, and what it's looking at is recognizing the importance of, well, first and foremost, engaging with the community in relation to the public interest criteria that relates to health, and also ensuring that the way that we calculate the significant cost threshold and how the term significant is defined remains relevant. So the two classic examples would be the decrease in the cost of medicine and more availability of community services. So therefore, it is important that things like these are reviewed on a regular basis and are assessed accordingly with international standards. Now, many listeners, if you are a migration agent or a legal practitioner, would be aware that New Zealand, for example, has increased their significant cost threshold to around $87,000 in recognition that certain health conditions that fall within that particular threshold do not necessarily pose a risk to the Australian community. Now, unfortunately, the government has given quite a short period for this particular review paper to be commented on, and the deadline is the 17th of November 2023. So therefore, if you are listening to this particular episode and you haven't put in your submission, it may probably be too late to have an input, but it is important. The reason why I wanted to flag this and the reason why I believe it's important to mention it in this episode is because whenever there is a discussion paper that happens around issues like health or any sort of other immigration related issues, there will probably be some sort of change in the regulations in the near future. So when I say near future, I'm talking about the next 12 months. Now, how is the average cost of an Australian is calculated? The current significant threshold methodology utilizes two annually published Australian Institute of Health and Welfare reports as data sources to calculate the significant threshold. Now, the 5-year per capita approach is used to calculate the significant threshold, and it sets out the value at a level that represents the average 5-year yearly per person expenditure on health and welfare services in Australia. Now, using this methodology, the average cost was determined to be $51,000, and that was back in 2021. Now, what can you do in order to determine whether or not a particular condition would pass the health requirement? It's a very broad question, and it's something that probably can't be answered by giving simple tips on what you can do. But the first and foremost is understanding the ramifications of a condition. So generally, a condition that requires a combination of drugs and also community services to treat it would attract a high costing. A condition that is likely to see a spike in symptoms during particular periods is likely to see a higher threshold. And also a condition that is likely to progress to something that is more aggressive is also likely to see a higher threshold. Now, at this stage, we don't have any further information in relation to whether the government will introduce a health waiver to all visa subclasses. So that's something that we would have to wait and see once this particular submission paper has been worked through. But it is important that this is in the foreground of our mind and hopefully we will see some positive changes around the health requirement for Australian immigration. Now, one of the things that I always say in my podcast, if you want to see change when it comes to immigration, you need to be involved in discussion papers and putting forward submissions when the Department of Home Affairs presents you with an opportunity. Now, I'm very pleased to announce that the Department of Home Affairs has announced that there is a consultation paper that has been released and is available for discussion in relation to the ideal size and composition of Australia's 2024-25 permanent migration program. Now, this particular paper is going to be addressing the following. How can migration policy and settings better support social cohesion and outcomes in Australia? How can migration policy settings support Australia's ongoing economic prosperity and fairness? And how should we factor in the impact and opportunities of migration on Australian communities, including terms of access to services such as health, education, housing, and infrastructure? Now, this submission closes in exactly 1 month time, 17th of December 2023. So therefore, if you do have any comments in relation to these 3 topics, feel free to send us an email, inquiries@crystalmigration.net. And now I just wanted to dissect these questions a little bit more. How can policy settings better support social cohesion outcomes in Australia? Now, that's a really good question, given the fact that there are limited pathways available towards permanent residency for migrants. If we look at the state allocations for general skilled migration, if we look at general skilled migration itself, the number of allocated places for this particular financial year remain quite low. So therefore, it is a disincentive for skilled migrants to stay in Australia, and that does in effect create an unwanted skill shortage. So for the last couple of years, we've been focusing on the STEM sector, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And because we've been focusing on that particular sector, there is now a shortage of tradespeople. So that's a really good question, and I would love to hear your comments on how can migration policy settings better support social cohesion outcomes in Australia. Second question, how can migration policy settings support Australia's ongoing economic prosperity and fairness? Now, this is again another really good question, and it goes without saying, if you want prosperity, you need to be able to invest into something. If you want something to grow, it won't grow without the investment. For us, it's important to maintain healthy migration planning levels in all states and territories and regions so that these areas can prosper. Now, the recent conference that I've attended, there was a presentation in regards to the growth of the Australian population and also foreign migration intake. And over 80% of all migrants move to either Sydney or Melbourne. So this means that cities like Perth, Adelaide, Hobart do not get the same number of migrants or migration intake, which then diminishes or demobilizes the prosperity. So therefore, I would love to hear your feedback on how can migration policy settings support Australia's ongoing prosperity and fairness. And one of the things that I think that we definitely need to be looking at is increasing the age cutoff for permanent residency from 45 to, at the very minimum, 50. And last but not least, how should we factor in the impact and opportunities of migration on Australian communities, including in terms of access to services such as health, education, housing, and infrastructure? Now, that is again a broad question, but it's important to keep in mind. So going back to what I said before, over 80% of migrants come to either Sydney or Melbourne. How do we support migrants? What sort of opportunities do we give to migrants? Can we maintain housing, education, and health at an affordable rate? Will this put a strain on our health system, our education system? But it all comes down to balance. So therefore, having the right balance of individuals coming into Australia and working in their profession is paramount. So potentially reviewing skilled migration program. We've got a skilled migration program where an individual, such as an accountant, for example, or a registered nurse, can apply for general skill migration, move to Australia, but never having an opportunity to work in their nominated occupation. So how do we deal with that? Now, I appreciate that that's again a broad question and there may not be a solution in sight or an immediate solution, but this is a discussion paper. So therefore any ideas, thoughts are welcome. So potentially creating more information sessions about how to secure jobs. Many migrants come to me and ask me a very direct question: can you help me to find employment, or where do I look for employment? So perhaps making that information more publicly available. Education, housing, and infrastructure. Now, I live in Sydney and the prices of housing, both rent and for purchase, has just skyrocketed in the last 12 months. What do we do about that? How do we help? How do we maintain healthy migration intake? And how do we keep the cost of living at a reasonable level? Now, again, it all comes down to balance, and therefore I would love to hear your opinion in relation to how we deal with this particular segment. So just again, the three questions are: how can immigration policy settings better support social cohesion outcomes in Australia? Question number two: how can migration policy settings support Australia's economic, ongoing prosperity and fairness? And last but not least, how should we factor in and opportunities of Australian migrants and Australian communities, including in terms of access to services such as health, education, housing, and infrastructure? So these submissions are due by 17th of December, and Crystal Migration will be putting in a submission on behalf of migrants. Alrighty. Hi, Reese. Thank you very much for joining us for episode 11 of Crystal Cast. I'm glad to have you here from Migration Insurance Brokers. So to kick off, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what does Migration Insurance Brokers do?
Yeah, hi Ross. Thanks for the invitation to come on today. Glad to be here. So look, as the name says, we are an insurance broker targeting the migration and education agent market. We've been in the market for a number of years in various roles, holding senior roles within Bupa and Medibank and other organisations where we helped overseas partners and local migration agent and education agent partners. Primarily, we help the agents with their business insurance. So that can be anything from professional indemnity to their liability, to their office equipment, workers' compensation, income protection, and trying to make sure that they're looked after together. And they also understand evolving and emerging risks such as cyber risk or data breaches. In addition to that, we help our agent partners grow their business we have facilities for their OBC and OSHC placements where we pay 15% commission and there is no volume target around those. So if an agent sends us one person per year, we'll still give them 15%. If they send us 100, we'll still give them 15%. So it's quite different to what the major players do. And it's with two of the approved health insurers in the market as well. So that's, I guess, a sum around what we do. Is on one side, we help the agents with their own business. And two, we help them grow a bit of revenue on the other side by providing them a high level of commission.
Excellent. And earlier we spoke about data breaches and just the emerging trend. And as you mentioned before, whether you're a migration agent or an immigration lawyer, we do hold a lot of personal information, and whether that's a document or an information in relation to a person or a company. So I suppose my question to you: how does that impact our day-to-day job? What should we as migration agents be aware of?
Yeah, look, I think what you need to be aware of is what is a data breach. Now, the Australian government has now put the Office of the Australian Information and Commissioner Office. There are mandatory requirements for organisations to report a data breach. So I guess what you need to do is go back to what a data breach is. And I guess the most fundamental way to explain that is it happens when personal information is accessed or disclosed without authorization, or is lost. Good example of that is a mobile phone that holds an individual's personal information is stolen. Alternatively, an individual's personal information is sent to the wrong person or email address, or a hacking of a database containing personal information has occurred. And you only find out about this after the event, of course. So all those instances, if there's ever a data breach, the government is setting out that there must be some remedies that they must do, such as notifying every person that has had their data stolen or breached. They must be able to identify what, how, who, why, when, and what was taken and stolen. So they need to have consultants come right through their systems and understand what they've got. So I touched on they look at personal information, sensitive information. Now, as you'd be aware, migration and education agents hold more information than most of the financial services companies do, or the Medibanks of
I
the world.
completely agree.
So, and the thing is, I know a lot of the migration agents, some of them don't have massive teams behind them from an IT point of view. They're not
Yeah.
IT savvy or technical. So sometimes they might think, I've got a bit of hacking software that I put on 3 years ago. It cost me a couple of $100. I think that's great. Going forward, I'd probably be saying, look, one of the main things you need to do is look at your firewall and antivirus protection. That's probably your main thing, and have a regular subscription where that gets updated on a monthly or a bi-monthly basis, because technology is moving so quickly.
Yeah,
There are, yeah.
exactly. And I was also going to ask as well, Reese, and that's a really good point. A lot of us, but we're not tech savvy, and especially if you're operating as a sole trader. And I think it's important to point out Omara recently released statistics saying that around 60% of all agents are actually sole traders. So you are right in the sense of saying that there's probably not going to be very big sort of IT teams supporting them. But let's just say, for example, I've had a data breach, so I've accidentally copied in the wrong Reese into a visa application. What do I do next?
Well, what to do if you think there has been a breach? In the first instance, notifications must be made via a couple of different methods to ensure that the security or the privacy breaches are managed effectively and efficiently. So you should be calling your cyber incident management team in the first instance. And you also need to send an email to your cyber insurer if you do have cyber insurance. From there, the cyber incident teams pretty much manage that, provided you've got a cyber insurance policy, of course. And that's one remedy to make sure, if you do have a data breach, that your business is protected. And that's the area where we help a lot of migration agents with, is actually looking at the different sorts of policies and getting quotes for them and making sure that they do have the right policy for their needs. Also, it's just not all about buying insurance, and insurance is just a remedy. There are sort of 10 tips, Ross, that I go through with a lot of the migration agents to help them out. And basically, the first one is always back up your data, because we see a lot of incidents where the bad actors come through and they'll send some ransomware which shuts down your systems until you pay the ransom. You can't get in. So if you back data on a daily basis, well, you only maybe lose 1 day's worth of data versus a week or a month, or I've even heard companies that do it every 6 months, which I sort of pulled my hair out a bit. The next big tip would be staff training. So identify for your teams, or even yourself, what is the right email to accept on or click on. If not, we've all received those fake DHL text messages saying your delivery's gone here, or it's being held up,
call
and then you click on that.
immediately.
It automatically that may drop some malware or some ransomware on your phone, which will then infect your systems. I touched on a bit earlier about having up-to-date firewalls and antivirus protection. One thing with us, with our insurance partner, if they come on via us and our insurance partner, the insurance partner actually provides up-to-date subscription for an antivirus protection and firewall software. That values at about $1,900, regardless of what the premium is. It doesn't matter, because the insurer is saying, well, I'm happy to spend $1,900 because it's going to maybe save me $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 throughout the year. So once again, that's good to have. Also, we always tell our agent partners, look, never pay a ransom. We saw last year an organization said, look, I just want my system back. I'm going to send him, the money or the Bitcoin or whatever they're being asked for. They reopened their systems, and a week later, the bad actor came back and locked them up again, wanting more money.
Mm.
So the insurers now are saying don't pay a ransom. The insurers are refusing to pay any ransoms at the moment as well. You can buy the cover, but it's hideously expensive. Then there's the basic sort of stuff, such as mobile phone encryption. So make sure your mobile phones are encrypted. Never store, another good one is never storing any credit card information on your phone, such as photos, or leaving that on your laptop. Some people take a photo of their credit card, so it's easily accessible. Others are password protection. Now, this is a really easy one. I'd say a minimum password needs to be at least 15 characters long, and it needs to be uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. So
Yeah.
what I've done to myself, I picked a couple of my favorite songs and taken the first letter out of each of every word of the chorus, and that's the way I remember that password. So that's an easy one.
That's a
If
good
you've got at
tip. I
least,
like that.
yeah, yeah, it works well. You also can then employ third-party vendor management. Now that can be a bit expensive, but once again, it just sort of helps making sure that you've got a team in there to look at those responses as well. Also, making sure that you've got two-person sign-off. So if you are sending money or information or documents that are sensitive, make sure there's someone else in your organization that can help you sign that off. Or if you're a sole trader, well, that's up to you because it's coming out of your own sort of bank account. And then also, if any of your clients ever email you, and this is the one that's coming quite prevalent, any of your clients email you and say, "Oh, we've actually changed bank accounts. Can you send all monies or documentation to, or whatever it might be, or securities to this new bank account or this new address?" Pick up the phone, give them a call and say, "Hey, I've just received this email. Is this right?" Now, this just happened with one of my clients, a trucking client in Queensland. They said, they called me and said, "Reece, they sent an email saying, 'Hi, you haven't met me. I'm just new to the organisation. Have been instructed to advise that we've now got a new bank account. Can you send all claims payments through to this new bank account?'" Came on, looked like a legitimate letterhead. Looked like everything looked fine. And I thought, that's really strange. Normally they'd call me and say, "Hey, this is what we're thinking. Is there a risk with this?" So I gave them a call and they said, "Absolutely not. That email is not from us." So I wouldn't have known till probably 2, 3, 4, 5 months later down the track, if they maybe rolled one of their vehicles, that 50, 60, $100,000 check could have gone off into the ether. So
100%. And I suppose it's one of those things as well, Reese, hey, where um, there is a bit of a common sense approach there. If you do get asked personal details, sensitive information, the example that I've used, I've actually had a very similar situation where a vendor that we used, they basically said, "Well, we're just letting you know that these are the new account details." And I simply just gave them a call and said, "Look, just making sure that this is the right account so that we can update it." And, with the insurance, the way that I look at it, is, you don't want to be using it every day, but you want to know that it's there. And I suppose just to sort of touch on that last question, Reese, you mentioned that there's also penalties as well that the government could potentially impose. So what are some of the risks that we need to be aware of in terms of the, I suppose, financial losses?
yeah, so for an individual, it could be up to 420,000 as a fine for not following what you need to under the notifiable breaches scheme. And if you're an organisation, it could be up to $50 million fine. Now, these are becoming more and more prevalent as more and more organisations are getting hacked and are having data breaches. And as I touched on before, Ross, there's some big corporations that have had very large data breaches. The big one that comes to my mind is Medibank, of course.
Yes.
That was well broadcast. Even a technology company such as Optus has had a number of breaches. So has Telstra. Woolworths is another big one. Even HBL lawyers, they lost 1 million documents of their clients,
Yes.
and that would be very sensitive information. So, organizations are scrambling for this. To think you're not going to be hacked is wrong. And one of the insurers actually turned around and said, "Look, there are two organizations in Australia now, the ones that know they've been hacked and the ones that don't know they've been hacked." So the hackers are looking for easy targets. Just because you do all those 10 tips or you buy the insurance, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get hacked. It's more likely that they'll look at you. You've got all these safe protections up in place. they'll move on to the next target. And I use the analogy: if you've got two houses, one's got bars on the windows, it's got an alarm, it's got dogs there, and big locks on the door, and the place next door has got none of that. Well, the robbers are going to go next door, aren't they? You'd think.
Yeah,
So,
100%. They might get less, but it's more safer
yeah,
to to go to that other house. And I completely agree with you there. At the end of the day, and also just the way that the information is provided to us, Reese. Everything is provided digitally. We hold a lot of sensitive information, and I would say, being a lawyer, we hold more sensitive information than a lot of other practices. So we would be, I suppose, a perfect target when it comes to cybersecurity breaches.
yeah. I've been talking to a couple of industry groups about making it mandatory for migration agents to buy cyber insurance because of how much information they hold, and the lack of, I guess, technical systems that a lot of the sole operators have in place. The cyber insurance premiums, they're not that expensive. Our premiums start at $250 upwards, and we look after organisations with revenue as little as $20,000 up to $5 million in revenue. So, what we can do is buy cover, but what you don't want to do is be left out on your own. And to have a breach happen, you don't have an incident response plan, which the insurers help set up for you. They have the numbers already set up for the insurance, the incident response teams as well. They've done this for a number of organisations. So you don't want to be having a breach and sort of scratching your head going, oh, what do I do?
What do I do
and
now?
then, having the potential of copping a large fine. Yeah.
Exactly. And
so,
with fines,
as I said, Ross,
with fines like that, I mean, it can just destroy the business completely.
Absolutely. Yeah. And lives, and let alone the data that's been lost as well. So it can be quite significant, the costs of that. But the insurance takes away a lot of those costs for them as well. Just to let you know, the insurance won't pay the fine, but it will pay the defence costs and the costs for the incident management teams. And also if their clients suffer a loss as well, and their clients turn around and sue them for loss of income or revenue or loss of their data or whatever it might be, that's picked up under the insurance programs as well. So, yeah.
Excellent. All righty, Reese. Well, thank you so much for being in touch with us today and being on our episode. I will paste your details if anyone wants to get in touch and discuss cybersecurity further. But I do believe that it's such an important and prominent topic. And as we, head into the new year, I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be more changes to the legislation, especially for migration agents.
Yeah, I think there will be. But look, thanks for the opportunity to come and have a chat, Ross.
Thanks so much, Reese.
And that's all that we have time for this week's episode of Crystalcast. I hope that you've enjoyed it. If there are any specific topics that you want us to cover, or if you want to be featured on one of our episodes, all you have to do is leave the comment down below, or subscribe to our channel, or send us an email, inquiries@crystalmigration.net. That's inquiries@crystalmigration.net. I will be back at the same place, same time next week. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.